Be inspired, supported, and empowered. This is the Global Healthy Living Foundation podcast network.
Welcome to The Health Advocates, a podcast that breaks down major health news of the week to help you make sense of it all. I'm your host, Steven Newmark, Chief Policy Officer at the Global Healthy Living Foundation. Our goal is to help you understand what's happening in the healthcare world to help you make informed decisions to live your best life. Today we're joined by Jon Erlichman, founder of TickerTake, a platform that simplifies the stock market and has reached nearly 1 billion views across social media. Jon is also a longtime financial journalist with past roles at Bloomberg, ABC, and CTV. In addition to his media work, 2 decades ago, Jon was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. While much of that journey was a private one, he has recently begun sharing his personal journey to help raise awareness and support others in the IBD community. Well, Jon, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate your time and hearing some of what you're about to tell us with your particular story.
Steven, thank you so much. It's great to be with you guys, and I'm a fan of the pod, and it's great to have a chance to share my story.
So just to get us started, can you tell us a little bit about your disease journey, when you were first diagnosed, how you responded to the news?
Yeah, well, I was living in New York City and was an adult when I was diagnosed with Crohn's. And, it was something I had known of growing up. I knew some friends who had navigated Crohn's. And I guess I thought, well, I'm an adult now. That's not something that necessarily is going to touch me. But yeah, I was working and living in New York City at Bloomberg Television. And it's funny, I still have these core memories for whatever reason of what was going on. I remember that my parents had come to town for a visit and we were busy showing them around and checking out the sights and sounds of Manhattan. And I thought, gosh, I do not feel my best right now. I just want to go. I just want to go home. So it was one of those things where you just feel off and you want to retool and regroup. And then as you start to figure out that it's something that's not easily figured out, and then you go and you see a specialist, you realize, wow, this is big. And, I think at first it was, I want to say, surreal in the sense that there was just so much going on for anyone who is navigating IBD. You're living your life. You've got so much going on. And we were the parents of a newborn at that time, our oldest daughter, Callie. And I remember one night, Callie needed a feed, and I was in our living room in New York City, which also doubled as her room because that's New York City for you. We share a lot of small spaces. And I had to put her down because, candidly, I had to go to the bathroom. And even at this point, we were still just figuring out what was wrong with me. We didn't quite know. I remember thinking, this is crazy. Like a few weeks ago, it seemed like we'd had our first child and, we're making our way in one of the most exciting cities in the world and exciting career. And now I'm trying to figure out, can I properly take care of my child if I don't even know what's going on with me? So it was a bit of a whirlwind. And I think one of the other things that was very true with me, I can't say this is true with everyone, but you want to get better. And so there is a period after you're diagnosed, especially as an adult. I guess for me, you're sort of trying to think through things logically, like we can get on the right medication and we can get the right process going here and we can figure this thing out. I want to solve this. Over time, you realize that that's a tough nut to crack. And I think one of the humbling parts was after going on a first round of medication and then feeling like enough progress had been made and the door was open to get off the meds, I wanted to jump through that door. Like that was the first train I was taking. And then it immediately led to like a relapse, basically. And it's very discouraging. So I would say the process was, wow, okay. Then you go through the process of trying to figure out how you're going to treat yourself. And then you have this hope around being able to get better. But there's also a period where you come to the realization that this might be something that doesn't go away. So I think those were some of the stages that I went through over the first 1.5 to 2 years after my diagnosis.
Yeah. Do you mind if I just ask very quickly? You were describing that feeling with a young baby. Did you suspect that there was something more than, well, I'm a new dad, I'm exhausted all the time, and this might be part of that? Or did you suspect it was something else?
It's a great question, Stephen, because then it gets us into peeling back the onion on what's at the root of anyone's IBD diagnosis. But definitely, I mean, I was getting up on average like 2 a.m. to go work morning shifts in television. So that was a bit bizarre and a stressful job in a stressful industry. Not sleeping a lot because you've got a newborn as well. So I figured, of course, those must be some of the considerations. I sometimes joke one of the last meals I had before I was diagnosed was at Chipotle. And I mean, no disrespect to Chipotle. I've interviewed their management as a business journalist over the years. They're one of the best run companies in the world, but you're sort of trying to piece together what happened. I had that meal at Chipotle. Is that the factor? Of course, yes, you're searching for answers on what got you here. And I found that over time, you were just left with the realization that it's going to be hard to know exactly what was at the root of this. And that was a reality check for me, but it was also stressful for family members. I remember even my parents at the time wondering what may have been at the root of this. Like, was it tied to maybe medication I had taken when I was a kid or a teenager? So that's the reality I feel like for a lot of people who are navigating these illnesses is that there's almost a shared stress or a shared guilt when you're trying to figure out what prompted this. And I think in my case, just because it was something that was diagnosed as an adult, there was that extra layer of what changed today versus yesterday. Even though in retrospect, I always had sensitivity issues around what I ate and how that impacted me. So at the end of the day, maybe things were always there to a certain extent and you just didn't know. So,
Well, one difference for you that most of us who deal with Crohn's don't have to deal with is we don't live our lives in such a public role. So given that you're a public persona and people know you, what prompted you to become so public with your disease?
well, I will say, Stephen, it was not a quick process to be public about it because in the first few years after my diagnosis, quite honestly, I was really just trying to manage life. You've got a busy job, you've got family duties. As I said, you're spending all this time trying different treatments and hopeful that maybe you can find a resolution that allows you to say, hey, I'm moving on from this in some way, shape, or form. And then the nature of my career meant that I moved around a lot. So I worked in New York and I worked in San Francisco and Los Angeles. And every time we moved, you'd have to do a reset of sorts where, I have to find the new doctor and then the doctor talks to you about what's our treatment plan. So it was almost like a rinse and repeat of just trying to figure out how to manage life, probably for the first decade of having Crohn's. I think, though, as I got used to the reality and I got older, I also was getting more confident just in what I do professionally. The truth is, and I think this is true with a lot of people when you're starting out in your career, as much as managers or people you work with, if you bring this stuff up, you will find how supportive people ultimately are. But I almost felt like I just didn't want to make it an issue so that I would feel like I'd be at a disadvantage for getting some opportunity, especially in television news, very competitive. Who gets to do the big interview? Who gets to go here? Breaking news, all this different stuff. And I guess I just didn't want to bring it to the forefront because I wanted to focus on just getting the work done and getting the opportunities. And then as I got older and more confident in myself and my surroundings, I did feel like there was more of an opportunity to show myself, talk a little bit more about who I am. It's interesting. I think that especially in media today and even in news, personality has really come a long way. It used to be, and part of this is probably tied to the fact that we didn't have as many choices in terms of news and how you get it. But I would say the way I grew up in the industry, your job is to report the news. Keep it straight. Don't inject yourself into the story. So I guess that was in the back of my mind as well. But when we got to a point where people were interested more so in, I guess, what was behind me, that started to become an opportunity to share it more. And candidly, it was my wife, Caroline, who said, "You've never really spoken publicly about this. And, I think you should." She's pretty smart. So I usually take her advice, and I did, and it was tremendous. It was, I don't want to say like a weight was lifted, but I really felt like I'd been able to share a little bit more of who I am. And I felt like it was something that people who knew felt more connected to my story as a result. And that was really powerful. So I'm not going to say it was something overnight. It took me a long time to have the confidence to be more public about it. But I think that's true about any person's life. As you get older, you get more comfortable in your skin. And in retrospect, I wish I had spoken up sooner, but I'm glad that I was able to do it.
No, that's great. And I think that those of us in the community are always grateful when folks who are more public facing, come forward with their condition. It makes it easier for the rest of us, if I may say that. Has it ever interfered with your professional work?
Oh gosh, I feel like every day, if I'm being honest with you. I think we all have to find our ways to manage the illness. And part of that will be your treatment plans and what you're discussing with your doctor. But in terms of how you deal with your day-to-day life and your day-to-day work life. So I didn't even necessarily realize it at the time, but in retrospect, I've always been dealing with it every day. Like the way I set up my day. There are, candidly, lots of bathroom breaks. There's like an internal knowledge of, I got to make sure I sort of map out my day. I've spent a lot of time sitting at a television anchor desk, right? So I don't know how much of it is conscious and not, but it's like your body is figuring out the rhythms that work for you so that you can do the job that you need to do. And in the case of my job, sometimes you've got to be out somewhere where there's no bathroom and you're mic'd up and you're stuck there for a long time. Sometimes you're in a studio and maybe there's a bathroom nearby, but you're stuck on the set for hours. So, it just, the body does what the body does in conjunction with the mind. And I just sort of figured out this, for some of your older listeners, the Frogger path to how I navigate a day. And I was thinking about this. I got to a point where I had a general sense wherever I was, what were the best bathroom options around the city? Just because I know if I'm going to have to get sent out in the field or I'm going to have to go somewhere, I'm just going to have to be at the ready to do that. That was always on my mind. Whether I was covering like a big Apple event in San Francisco, you just always know the surroundings. And so from that perspective, yes, it's with you every day. Now, I'm lucky in the sense that I've been able to do my job and to work with long stints in the hospital or just being unable to work at all. But I think one of the reasons why it is rewarding to share my story is because it makes me feel like some of that, which I've never told anybody that, the logistics of my day, that it just feels more comfortable to share when I'm sharing my broader story.
Yeah, definitely. What advice would you give to others who may not be as high profile as you, but are interested in talking more publicly about their condition?
Well, I think that's a great question. And I would really encourage anyone and everyone to consider sharing their story. For me, as I started to talk more about my situation, what I found was such a great gift. It was the gift of community, candidly, because as I spoke to more and more people who navigate these illnesses, I realized that despite the fact that so many people are battling this, that it doesn't necessarily get the same level of attention across society as other illnesses. So there's a lot of people who are going through private battles. When I first started talking about it, I found a community of people that I could then talk myself to about my own experiences. And through that, it felt like, wow, maybe I was discounting the mental health aspect of this. You can work with your doctor, you can work with a gastroenterologist, you can find a medical plan to navigate your illness. And by the way, I'm glad that increasingly in the medical field, we're seeing doctors that are sort of trying to open the doors towards more mental health options for people who are battling this. But that's a very real thing. So for me, I felt like the ability to speak out with the intent of just sharing my story and hopefully helping others, that was a big check mark. It was so rewarding to hear people would then share their story with me and who were appreciative of that. But selfishly, Steven, I felt like it helped me as much, if not more so.
It was like it was therapeutic almost.
Completely. And beyond that, just gave me an opportunity to meet a lot of incredible people who doing incredible things and are incredibly brave. And I'm very thankful that I had the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You talked earlier about your wife, Caroline, and the support that she gave you. Could you just expand upon your entire family and how they have been a support system for you?
It has meant the world. Their support has been tremendous. that's one part that as more and more people talk about what they're going through, I think it also opens the door for more and more family stories to be shared. But I still don't think it gets enough time in the spotlight, is just how much work families do to help take care of their loved ones, which is such a stress to families. If someone who is suffering feels like they've been suffering in the shadows and they haven't had a way to talk about it, what about the family members who have been there to support their loved one and also didn't really feel like they had an outlet? So I think that's a really important thing, that a conversation with a community is not just those who are directly impacted, but it's everybody. That includes family. And in my case, yes, Caroline, my wife, has been incredible. I've got 2 great daughters, Callie and Quinn.
Are they aware of your condition?
They are, and they would keep me honest if they felt like...
Do you also feel the need as they get older to sort of have them checked, or just be aware, like, hey, this might be something you'll have to look into someday?
All the time. You're always thinking about that part too. And, I was saying earlier how when I was diagnosed, how my parents were wondering what might have been at the root cause. And they were both so supportive. But I remember in particular, my dad just sort of trying to figure out, in particular, like a drug I had taken as a teenager too, and trying to sort of figure out and connect the dots. And you could feel how much work he had put into just trying to feel out whether or not there was something that had happened in the past that had led me to where I was today. And so on the one hand, I felt like he had carried that stress, but it also showed how much he cared and how much my parents cared and just wanted to be supportive. And my sister, my extended family, I mean, everyone's been incredible over the years. I probably have, Steven, had much better meals, candidly, as a result. Whether it's my parents or my in-laws, I feel like I sometimes I get the better meals.
So there are some positives.
Exactly.
Well, before we go, I want to leave on something in an even more positive note. Can you tell us something you're hopeful for in the coming years with regards to Crohn's?
Well, I am definitely very hopeful. I'm generally an optimist, and one of the things that in sharing my story has been quite rewarding is just to learn about what I consider to be this modern day illness. And in my work, I spend a lot of time trying to figure out where business is going, where technology is taking us. And I'm very excited by a lot of the research that's being done in the IBD field to try to better assess some of the root causes. As everyone who is navigating probably knows, there's a lot of work going into figuring out the environmental impact. You're in New York City, it's a very busy place, city environments, the modern day cities, these are just not the same environments that we had in the past. And whether it's the work being done on family ties to the illness or weather-related factors or our diets in 2025 or, city living, all of these things, we're able to have a better handle, at least on some of the data around this, which for me, I found very, very rewarding to see, especially since in my own case, you're trying to figure out what is that root cause. And it's really hard to know the exact answer that led you down one path. But I'm very, very hopeful based on all the research that's being done and being funded now. And I think that for the healthcare industry and the pharmaceutical companies that are also putting a lot of time and energy into this, all the big players, Amgen's been great. I think that the work that is being done and then the ability to bring some of those learnings into the field of medicine makes me very, very hopeful for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo that and say, to put a fine point on it, once you are diagnosed, the future is optimistic in terms of treatment and living a life the way it should be lived. So we're in some ways very lucky to live in 2025 when there are a lot of options and a lot of therapies for us. Well, thank you, Jon. We really appreciate your time and good luck with everything. And let's stay in touch.
Great. Steven, thank you so much. And good luck with the pod. It's great to listen to, and I appreciated being part of it.
And with that, thanks for listening to The Health Advocates, a podcast that breaks down major health news of the week to help you make sense of it all. If you like this episode, give us a rating, write a review, and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen. I'm Steven Newmark. We'll see you next time.
Be inspired, supported, and empowered. This is the Global Healthy Living Foundation Podcast Network.